This is Inside the Circle, Creating Resilient Systems. I'm Kate Cooper with Inner Circle Mental Health, and I'm here with Autumn Cooper.
Together, we spend a lot of time working with individuals, teams, and organizations trying to navigate the realities of high-pressure work. Not just what people are doing, but what it's doing to them over time.
Today, we're starting with something that doesn't always have clear language, but most people recognize it when they feel it.
Today's question is, have you ever had a moment at work where you did what was required, but something in you didn't sit right afterward?
Have you ever had a moment at work where you did what was required, but that did not sit right with you? The thing that was required just did not sit right with you. I think that we all have examples of this, especially in department systems. I think that you could point to many different levels of responder systems where you did your job, you did what was required of you.
You followed the policy.
You followed the policy, but the policy is not making you feel good.
Yeah.
The policy has some lack happening. Like there is some lacking in the policy.
The policy doesn't always allow for humans to be humans, right? You know, I've worked in mental health care for many, many years, and sometimes, you know, what the policy says doesn't really support the person in receiving the care that they really require. I can think of a time when I was working with someone who couldn't get the medication that they needed, and everything in me was like, I'll just pay for that medication. But that would go against policy. That might cost me my job. That might cost me my license. And I sat with the knowing of like, I might be confronting some significant decompensation from this client, and there was nothing that I could do about it.
See, I think that that's where that specific example, like you could see the danger zone, right? Like you could see the danger of providing somebody with the medication and knowing that, number one, it goes against the policy of the company you're working for, which like you have a job and you need to pay your bills, and that is very, very important. And also, I guess that there's like the element of you don't want them to be relying on you. Like you don't want, like, there's other things in play.
Right.
But when your heart's really saying like, this is what I need to do. See, I'm going to preface this with, over the last 2 years, I have become unemployable. And that is very much because, I was not a big policy follower in the first place. I have always historically bent the rules when my morals have been able to. Like if I have a really, really strong feeling that this is what I need to do, then I'm going to do it regardless of the repercussions. And I recognize that that quality makes me very not desired in in more strict fields. But luckily, I've never worked in a very restrictive field where an action of doing the right thing at the right time for the right people has caused me like backlash in any form.
I wish I could say that. Like I think both of us.
Well,
right?
you have a license, and I think that's the difference. It's like you have a license to protect, and I don't have a license to protect, and that's probably a lot of the issue.
Well, right. I would agree that there's certainly some degree of like, I don't want to lose my license. I worked for 7 years to 9 years to get it, and then over the last 20 years to keep it. But you know, I think in other ways, in systems where I was working where I didn't require the use of my license, like sometimes those policies or the lack of policies would cause such deep despair inside of me because I was a person in the system that people came to, right? Like I have a natural listening ability. People just stop by my office. They knock on the door. They say, hey, can I have a chat with you later? And oftentimes what they were bringing to me were things that were outside of my scope to do anything with anyway. But having to sit with that in my body and know that I was powerless to make any change, or that when I tried to make change, it was roadblocked or stymied because of fear from people above me.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a huge challenge that a lot of people in certain organizations face, right? They're the secret keepers. They're the people who have the couch in their office that you just stop by when you have a moment. And a lot of times those conversations were just deeply meaningful and personal to have. And, I know that sometimes, well, we've talked frequently about me being a fix animal. Like I love to fix things.
Yeah,
If I
I was
get
about to call
triggered,
you out for being a
y-
fixer. You
yeah,
are immediately
I,
you immediately fix the situation.
I'm working really hard to immediately solve it. But I do think over the last probably 7 or 8 years, I've learned to be a little bit more reflective and understand that not all problems can be solved, and especially not by an individual contributor.
Mhm.
But that having the ability to take that information up and feeling that you can trust your leadership with holding it, even if they too cannot do anything about it. I
Mhm.
mean, that's one of the ways we repair the injury that happens to people in who are absorbing the shock absorbers of the system.
Yeah. I think it's really easy to look at this from like a bottom up perspective, but like at the very top leadership level, what becomes hard and becomes sticky even for us at inner circle is that there's a policy and it's there for a reason. And just because you don't understand the reason doesn't mean that it doesn't exist for a reason. And so while we try to be very accommodating and we try to make sure that we're putting like the individual's best interest in mind, there are always, I think, going to be situations in any workplace system, regardless of field, where the policy just does not support what is the right thing in this case. And you can't always differentiate from the path that you're on. And that's really hard to be able to hold that line and say, like, no, this is something that cannot happen under any circumstances. And you have to accept that. And what happens when you want to do something very, very compassionate and I'm over here saying, absolutely not. What happens in that moment is that luckily that hasn't happened.
Well, I think one of the ways that if you don't want that kind of combustion thing to happen in your system,
Mhm,
it's really important to help people understand the why of any
mhm,
policy. Like it's to protect you, it's to
mhm,
protect our reputation,
mhm.
and helping understand the why. So if you have a sense of the why, you know, that goes back to values,
It
right?
does, it does.
Yeah, if you have the value of integrity,
Mhm.
then the why is integrity.
Yeah.
This is going to help us maintain our integrity. And that is, in this field, we lose that. We lose business.
Mhm.
We lose clients. And so operating from that, I think is really critical.
Well, and, like, when you start bending rules and policies, it's almost like, what's the point of having them in the first place? Because especially if you're only allowing, like, one person to bend these rules and policies, then it ends up becoming the standard that, like, yeah, these rules are on paper, but they don't actually count. And how does that lead to, like, a workplace deterioration, like moral deterioration, workplace culture deterioration? Like, someone somewhere has to hold that standard even when it feels hard and even when it feels unfair for the situation. um and if it comes up more than once, then maybe it's time for reevaluation. But I can't there've been hard decisions that have been made that don't necessarily make me feel super great, but they're the standards anyway.
Absolutely. And, I think too, if you did everything or senior leadership or executive leadership did everything on a case by case basis,
Mm,
that would be your entire job.
yeah.
That would not be fulfilling to make final determinations on every potential policy challenge.
Yeah.
So policies exist for a reason. And I think that most people can be flexible enough to stretch their own internal resolve to navigate that policy, but that takes the ability to feel safe enough to talk to your person, the
Yeah.
leader, who sits above you on the organizational chart, to say, could we talk about this policy?
Yeah.
Could we, especially if it's coming up over and over again, right? It requires the vulnerability of the policymakers
Mhm.
to say, you know what, like maybe it's something we could have a discussion about. Maybe let's get the team together and collaborate on if this policy is serving us well, and
Mhm.
if it isn't, being flexible enough as senior and executive leadership to say we're going to amend the policy.
Yeah.
But I think that that's where a lot of organizations really struggle because, you get to the space where you're like, well, it's the policy, and the policy is the policy,
Yeah.
and there's no room for conversing about the outdatedness of that policy.
Mhm.
And let's
And
be
some of them
honest,
are very
yeah, let's
outdated.
be honest, like, nobody's updating policies
No.
consistently. My, first, just side note, like, my first PhD that I started, and then the pandemic interrupted everything, was on policy, because
Ooh.
I think that having conversations and being really wise about policy development is something
Mhm.
that not a lot of people do, and because the policy was created back in the 1900s before we had this much tech, like,
Back in the
back in the
1900s.
1900s, uh, that, like, we don't we don't consistently have conversations about policies.
Yeah. Well, and
Oh,
things evolve so much. Like, look, this is a dumb area, but like dress codes. Dress code policies where in the 1900s you were required to like wear a suit and tie. You were supposed to be business casual at
pantyhose.
most workplaces, right? I don't care if you show up to work in your pajamas as long as you're at work and you look like presentable enough to talk to clients during the day, like half of our staff doesn't even wear shoes during the day. Like I that's not a thing to me, but I know for some employers it really is an issue.
Yeah, I think we get stuck again on that appearance of how we look,
Mhm.
and I think that our values really kind of focus more on how we work together well
Yeah.
and what works best for the people that we're serving.
Yeah.
And that's how we handle these things.
Yeah.
And also, right, like I think sometimes policies, don't really allow for the professional judgment that somebody has, and that can erode trust if you
Mhm.
think like this is actually best practice.
Yeah.
Like if you say this is the best practice for this is what research
I actually
supports.
hate it when people say this is best practice.
Yeah, tell me why.
Because to like I think that you can say this is best practice for a lot of different things and a lot of people tend to say that this is best practice because they say it's best practice, not because it's anchored in research. And that's really where I kind of like dig at people is like, can you show me this research that says that this is best practice? Because until that point, when I'm reading and I will read that study, I don't believe you.
Oh, well, I don't know that I've ever had anybody tell me it was best practice when it wasn't anchored in research. So,
Really?
most of the people that when we're having conversations about how they're going to approach a situation
Mm-hmm.
have done, meaningful connections to the research before they move forward.
Okay.
I used to do this like parenting thing, and best practice back in the 1970s was that in therapy, children were getting spanked, but it was a controlled spanking. And that was best practice at the time
Mm-hmm.
to teach grown-ups how to help maintain their temper while they're disciplining their child physically.
Okay.
And that if we didn't update policy, like, could you imagine in 2026 having a kid spanked at therapy?
That is
Does that
I
blow you away?
it blows me away, and just thinking about, like, yes, that need to update as society has changed, and as, like, we've moved forward in the research of child development and best practices.
Yeah.
Alright, you win. You win this one.
There's no win here.
Yeah, I mean,
I
I
think
feel
we're
like
both coming at it from the same angle. We just had to land there in our own
yeah,
windy paths.
yeah. So, I really wanna dive into something has come up this week several times. And I know that this is kind of the topic of this entire podcast. Um, can you talk to me a little bit about moral injury?
Yeah, moral injury. Well, first, let's just talk about we have terminology.
Mhm.
Science helps us create terminology. And so the terminology that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, cracking in,
Mhm.
the terminology of burnout and compassion fatigue and secondary trauma. We have to have language that helps describe what those concepts look like because people are dealing with it even if they don't know the name of it.
Mhm.
Right? I think that was in our opening introduction to this. Like we have felt it, but we don't know what the name of it is. And I'm a big believer that once we have some language around it, we're able to maneuver quickly through it. So sometimes it can just feel like semantics, but what I know from being in the therapy role for many, many, many years is that semantics matter because semantics help your neurotransmitters fire differently.
Mhm.
So, if I'm going to go on a little tangent around semantics. So, if you said, you know, um, you should get to work earlier than you're getting to work, right?
Mhm.
If I said I wouldn't talk to you like that, but, like, if I told you, "Kate, you should really try to get here about 30 minutes earlier," how would that feel inside of your body?
I would immediately say like, what did I do wrong? What expectation did I not meet? Like I feel like I'm always on time. So what is this person expecting of me? I would immediately be taken aback and I would be like, what do you mean I'm not good? I'm not a good employee. Like I'm not good at this.
What
I'm
would
not good at
that
my
do
job.
for our relationship?
I would be annoyed at you. I would go talk about you later.
Okay. So, but if I said, "Kate, I've been thinking how helpful it would be if you could get here about 30 minutes before this big meeting."
I like that you frame it as this big meeting instead of just all of the time because when you say, I wish that you were here 30 minutes earlier, to me, that says all of the time because now I've always been late to every meeting that we've ever had. And I'm embarrassed and I feel ashamed and I really don't want to talk to you anymore. But if you're saying for this one meeting, I'm like, oh, well, we need some time to prep.
Right.
Like
And that would make sense.
yeah, we have 30 minutes of prep time before this meeting.
And I didn't say that you have been failing my expectations for the last year.
Yeah.
And when you internalize that, you went into that space of like, what have I been doing wrong?
Yeah.
And then also the rupture in our relationship that would occur had I should on you.
I love it when we talk about shoulding.
Don't shit on me, right?
Don't should on
That's a
me.
rule that we try to really kind of think through. And so that just, that comes from cognitive behavioral therapy, but I don't think you have to be in therapy to receive kind of therapeutic advice,
Yeah.
right? So, it's important to understand that this is not therapy, but
Mhm.
that language of shoulding on each other automatically sets you up for failure.
Yeah.
And failure in many, many people, not all people, creates a sense of shame.
Mhm.
And one of the things we know about shame from Brene Brown's work is that shame paralyzes people. It's a
Mm.
hijack of the central nervous system. And that would have put our relationship on pause had I talked to you like that.
Mhm.
Again, this is not an example we would ever use, but
Yeah.
that experience inside of your body of like,
What did I do wrong?
right,
Yeah.
it paused you
Mhm.
and you started going backwards in time,
Yeah.
right?
Immediately.
Immediately versus even if I had said like, Kate, I'd really appreciate it if you could get to work 30 minutes earlier than you've been getting to work.
Mhm.
Even that.
I mean, I don't love that one. That's not my favorite. I think I like it better than the first one, but yeah, no, I still don't like that one.
Well, right. Well, no one loves criticism.
Yeah.
But if you think about what's happening in your body,
Mhm.
you were just able to talk about like, oh, I would really not like that very much. But
Yeah.
you didn't even in that moment start going backwards.
No, you're right. I didn't. I did start going forwards a little bit and I was
Yeah.
like, "Well, how now I have to prep for that." So I'm much more like prepared with that
Right.
one,
You
which
weren't
is so
paralyzed in going backwards.
this is actually so interesting because I didn't even you just explained what my brain did before my brain even told me what it did. You did that last night too.
I do that sometimes.
Yeah.
Well, and again, that's because language matters
Mhm.
and how we talk about different constructs matter. And having the language, if I just went everything comes down to burnout,
Mhm.
I would be leaving out a lot of people who aren't feeling terribly burned out. That comes from the exhaustion of doing the big work.
Mhm.
But let's go back to the concept of moral injury and moral distress.
Mhm.
I mean, that is a thing that's happening in a lot of spaces. I hold these kind of groups where people come in and reflect on how the work impacts them. So we
Mhm.
have reflective consultation that we do consistently across different organizations. And a person was telling this story and about how they were trying to help somebody, but they were absorbing all of that overwhelm in that space because they were also feeling it too. And when they brought it to our space, I was able to name it as moral injury and talk a little bit about what moral injury is. And that's just where there's a big difference between what your brain and your heart and your spirit knows is the right thing to do, but policy doesn't allow it.
Mhm.
And when I gave them that s- language, I literally saw her shoulders fall away from her face. And she said, like, I feel like a completely different person just having an ability to talk about it in a way that's framed
Mhm.
in some language that makes sense to me. And I also like to highlight the idea that when we have this language, it helps us feel less alone,
Yeah. You
right?
always say that, I know it's a quote from somebody else, but you always say, "If you can name it, you can tame it."
Yeah.
And that resonates in my mind all of the time. And I will tell you 100% it has helped my communication in every aspect of my life because now I know that if I can name something that I am feeling or name something that I am experiencing, if I could say that out loud, I can get through it.
Absolutely. That comes from Dan Siegel. He's the father of interpersonal neurobiology. And he's the original developer of the brain talk, the hand brain model that we
Ooh.
use when we do the brain talk. And he talks about that idea from like a neurobiological perspective. When you name the emotion or the experience or
Mhm.
the expectation or the hope or the need, then something automatic it comes out of your body and it lands in a bigger space, which is in the relationship. And when you do that repetitively, it gives your relationship a boost because
Mhm.
you know what you're talking about. And I think we've mentioned before, but the only way to really change culture, and that's what we're doing, trying to change the culture of high acuity systems and families who live in high acuity workspaces, is to have a common understanding and a shared language.
Yeah.
So if I say something to you like, I'm feeling pretty burned out, you're going to know what I'm talking about because we
Mhm.
have the language of burnout.
Yeah.
But if I said something to you like, "Oh, that's giving that's giving me pause. I'm feeling a little bit of moral distress here
Yeah.
because I've always done this and now I'm not doing that anymore." Like
Yeah.
that gives us language to be able to use. And then at the bigger level, when we have terminology for something, again, semantics matter. It
Semantics
helps
matter.
us feel less alone. Helps us feel less alone.
Mhm. And seen.
It
It
helps us
helps
feel
us feel
seen.
seen.
Mhm. And what happens when you're seen? Like, what is that experience like in your body?
You feel relieved.
Hmm.
There's so much relief that happens, and a couple of podcasts ago when you were talking about, cracking in, that's been one of our most brought back clips on across all of our social media platforms, is people are resonating with this idea, like, they are feeling seen. If you go through those comments, you see people from all professions of helpers, like, there's teachers in there, there's nurses in there, there's literally they will name their profession and they'll say, "This is me. This is where I'm at. I just left my job because of this. The person above me just left their job and now I'm feeling this." Like it resonated with so many people and I don't know that that term of cracking in has ever been widely known. Like you're definitely the first person who's ever said it to me. Um but just seeing that in real time, I think has been really special, because our big goal is culture change and our big goal is systems work. And if we can keep these heroes in these roles for longer because they're feeling seen and because they are able to talk about their feelings. That's my whole goal. That's my wish for Inner Circle is that we're able to make a difference in cultures and systems and individuals all at the
Uh,
same time.
I agree. And then that helps us, be thoughtful about how we have these conversations with the people that are serving the people that Inner Circle is serving.
Mhm.
So, our clinicians and the front office staff, and even amongst each other
Mhm.
on the leadership team, having the ability to l- ask questions about levels of burnout, um, I have a training on burnout that I like to do, and in that training is a table, and
Mm.
it's a table that has all of the different kind of terminology and then the reasons why we want to address that. And I developed it to really give people an ability at the beginning or the end of a staff meeting to just pause and reflect. You don't have to share that you're experiencing significant cracking in. That might not feel
Mhm.
safe.
Yeah.
But if you can normalize that these are some things that are continually coming up in the workplace,
Mhm.
secondary trauma, compassion fatigue, cracking in, moral distress, moral
Mhm.
injury, then you can at least reflect on that. And, if that's repeatedly happening for you over time, the supervisor or leader in that space can say, if this keeps coming up for you, it might be important for you to get some extra help
Yeah.
because, we don't want you carrying all of this stuff home every day.
Mhm. Also, from like a top leadership perspective, if I'm hearing that terminology from my staff, the first time honestly would be concerning, but like over and over and over and over again, like number 1, that is really hard on your ego to hear.
Mhm.
So it takes a supervisor or a leader that is more reflective, and more capable of handling criticism, and because it feels like criticism, I know it's not, but it tends to feel like criticism, which I think is why so many leaders shut it down, is they're like, I don't wanna hear this. This is not something like, I do not criticize me in this way. But really it's not criticism, it's communication
And data.
and data. And if I had a group of people, or even just one person, consistently telling me all of these different words, like I feel like I'm cracking in, like I'm feeling burned out, like I would want to know how to fix that on a systems level. I mean, like we can always offer the extra support. We can say, hey, I think that it would be helpful if we figured out how you could talk to someone. Um, but on the systems level, that's telling you that something in your policy, something in your workplace really does need to change, especially if you're hearing it from more than one person. So that also requires safety for more than one, because sometimes you get that one person who is difficult to work with, right? Like we've all worked with the difficult person, and normally the difficult person is the one who calls things out and defies the status quo, right?
Absolutely.
And it's just like, difficult people are kind of like alarm bells in a system.
Difficult people tend to be the people who are most sensitive to these concepts
Mhm.
because they are disrupting the status quo.
And they're brave.
There it's such a brave place to be, and it's also brave to be able to hear that and reflect on that and decide as a leadership group, like, what can we do differently to move forward? Because, when we're hearing consistent critical feedback, that there's room for growth there, right? Like,
Mhm.
if we can step back and take our egos out of it, there's room for some change to happen.
Mhm.
And that's how innovation and transformation and growth in organizations happening. It takes being vulnerable enough to hear the hard things. It takes being vulnerable enough to seek outside consultation to say things are happening in the system. We don't know what's happening. We do not have employees staying. We're
Mhm.
losing our best employees. We're losing employees who've been here for over 20 years.
Mhm.
And a lot of that comes from those feelings. Like, if you think about this idea of cracking in, one of the things that really drives that is feeling that you're just replaceable.
Yeah.
And being replaceable for people who have this big heart to do this big helping work or this big healing work, feeling replaceable, like that's a direct place of moral injury.
I think that's honestly probably some of my highest points of moral injury is it when I leave an organization and they immediately fill your spot. Like, that hurts me probably more than anything that ever happened during my time there, because now I don't feel like I made an impact, and I feel like you were just waiting for me to leave so you could replace me with someone else. Like, so many feelings, and I listened to a podcast one time, um, that I think it was mostly for police officers, um, oftentimes they are more likely to seek individual therapy after a moral injury happens in the workplace, not after a critical incident, not during marriage issues with their spouse. It is when they feel betrayed by their department, maybe for the first time. But if they feel like they've given everything to their department and their department didn't have their back or created some kind of policy or did something, moral injury was a bigger push into individual therapy than anything else that happened in those responders' lives. I wish I could remember what podcast it was, but it was a great listen.
Well, maybe we can locate that because I think the more people are talking about this, the better.
Yeah.
And if that's what gets somebody into help, right? Like that's really hard. But I'm also glad they got the help they needed.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's your I mean, it makes total sense to me
Mhm.
that, that might be the first time to move into a space of getting extra support,
Mhm.
if that's your peer team or a therapist or just talking to your trusted friend group, all valuable. That's really an opportunity to pause and reflect and move forward, but you can only do that if you're regulated. And
Mhm.
one of the things we know about moral distress is that it's extremely dysregulating to the system. The system doesn't know how to absorb it because it goes against your values. It goes
Mhm.
against all the things that you've ever been learned or taught. I think about teachers, right? Like they see a child that's deeply, deeply struggling. They can't name any abuse or neglect that's going on, but they know something big is happening and they
Mhm.
send that kid home every day
Mm.
with that thing in their heart like something's happening here.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is, but I know it's there and I hurt
Yeah.
because of it.
Yeah.
And then, if not, going back to education, but just in any system, if that's happening to you and you don't feel like you can take that information up so that we can do something about it, again, that leads to that internal combustion response of just cracking
Yeah.
under all of the pressure of the people below you. I used to talk about this work being kind of like a sandwich. So you've got the pressure above you from policy and organizational demands and leadership requirements, and then the needs and experiences and hopes and hurts of the people that you're serving.
Mhm.
But after doing lots more trainings and bigger conversations and being in different training and consultation spaces, I don't think it's a sandwich. I think it's a box.
Interesting, because as you're describing this, I'm like, "This is a sandwich. Tell me
Yeah.
about the box."
So the top of that box again, the lid is the leadership.
Mhm. The leadership lid.
The leadership lid, and then the bottom again is the families that you're trying to serve.
Mhm.
And then on the side might be all the things all the
Mhm.
research that you have, all the best practices that live inside of your body coming in and saying, "Oh," and then on the other side of that is your own morals, your own
Mm.
values.
Okay.
And so, you know, from a neurobiological perspective, if a person's in a trap or a mammal is in a trap, they're going to do all that they can to get out of it.
Mhm.
And then if you think about if you're an employee who's living in that box, who's every day navigating that box,
Mhm.
you know, that's going to have impacts in all spaces of their lives.
Yeah. They're gonna be bringing parts of that box home every day because it's a little bit inescapable, right? Like, we work so much of our lives.
Mhm.
First off, I think it's ridiculous that we think that that shouldn't impact our home. I think that we need to learn some skills to be more fluid between those 2 spaces, the work life and the home life. But also I'm over here, like, owning a business and working, like, 120 hours a week and pretending like that's normal too. So I will give myself, some benefit of the doubt there, but, um being inside of a box that you don't necessarily agree with all the time is tremendous pressure. That's a lot of pressure to put on a person. I think you bring up such a great point, like going to the education system, because that's probably one of the better known examples of where we have teachers who are working so hard for
Mhm.
their students and for the betterment of those children in their class. And they know when something's going on. They have their suspicions. They see dirty clothes. They see hungry kids. And you remember that lunch lady, just I think it was not even that long ago, who got sent to jail for feeding the school children and they didn't pay. And so I think it ended up being like an embezzlement charge because she was feeding the kids without them paying.
She'd probably had been walking around with that moral distress and injury inside of her for a while before
Yeah.
she decided to do something against policy.
Yeah.
And does that policy make sense in this environment right now? I mean, I don't know how I would feel every day seeing a child go home and go hungry.
Yeah.
I mean, well, I
You
know
feed
I would do
everybody,
something
Autumn.
about it. I would start a coalition and
Yes.
feed people, and
Yeah.
I did do that. I still do
You
that.
still do that. You do that.
Yes, I do that now. But I can't imagine what that must be like to see a kid not be able to get a tray.
Mhm.
Like, think about, like, that's humans hurting
Yeah.
because of policy.
Yep.
And yeah, the school might absorb a little bit of financial loss from that,
Mhm.
but that child's going to learn better if they're
Mhm.
not hungry. That child is going to believe that they're more worthy
Yeah.
of moving forward in this life if they're fed and their basic needs are consistently
Mhm.
met. And you're right, like teachers know. I mean, if we look at the systems piece of that, like teachers tend to make more referrals
Mhm.
to the hotline regarding abuse and neglect than
Mhm.
any other profession because they are spending the majority of their waking lives in classrooms seeing children struggle.
Yeah.
And even so, like even on the, that hotline is really only to really go do something about abuse and neglect.
Mhm.
It's not really meant to do anything about meeting basic needs.
No.
Although in some states they do it that way.
Do they?
Mhm.
That's so interesting. I feel like there are so many disconnection points that like I would love to solve in my spare time. Um
Which is none.
which is none. But like you see all of these gaps between all of these different fields that are all facing these moral injury challenges.
Mhm.
So like you go from the schools to the DHS workers to the police to the hospital systems, like it's a line of all of these different systems that are interconnected and also feeling all of these pressures and they're separated. Like nobody knows that the health department can give you vaccines. Like I didn't know that. And honestly, after even working for the health department, I don't know all of the services that we provided and continue to provide.
I think it's either that you don't know what the public health system can do for you or that you only think they do immunizations.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, being able to access and receive support, I think
Mhm.
that's what you're getting to is that
Yeah.
there's just consistent barriers to knowing.
Yeah. And then we all tend to operate in these silos. Like, even in the private sector, the private public sector, there are so many well meaning people and organizations that are existing in silos and not working together to bridge the gaps from one problem area to another.
You know, I built a presentation about silos because we hear constantly about breaking them down.
Yeah.
And, I kept hearing it and kept hearing it. And then a mentor of mine, Laura Porter, said that, silos exist for a reason. And that's all she said. So then I started digging. Why do silos exist? Silos exist because of funding. Because if a certain space has this expertise,
Mhm.
then they know what to do with that and can get some funding streams going.
Mhm.
Also, they have specialized expertise in certain areas,
Yeah.
right? Like we don't have to still talk about state systems, but like as an example, the health department has their lane, and then the
Mhm.
Department of Mental Health has their lane, and then
Mhm.
the Department of Corrections has their lane,
But
and
there's so much overlap.
there's so much overlap. So the problem isn't the silos.
Mhm.
The problem is that we don't have bridges and tunnels to navigate the silos.
Yes.
We don't know in your own system. You
Mhm.
said when you used to work there, I didn't know all the things that we did.
Yeah.
And like
If an employee of that system is not totally sure of all of the services that that system offers, how is the general public supposed to know?
how right. If
And
we
that is
don't
not
know,
a
how do they know?
criticism.
It's not a criticism, but it is a reality.
Yeah.
Like we're calling out reality here. Yeah, I remember when I first started at the health department, uh, I was new and a clerk answered the phone back where I was doing a little bit of copying.
Mhm.
And I heard her on the phone go, "No, we don't have a therapist for 7-year-olds. Yeah, we only serve birth to 3." And I, of course, like go over and I'm like waving in her face,
Bust
like,
into
"No,
her
wait a minute.
office.
And I'm like, "I do therapy." And she waves me off. And I'm like, she doesn't even know who I
Yeah.
am in this system.
Yeah.
And, like another person might have just kind of went back to their office and, you know, sat with that or gotten paralyzed by that. Like, I'm
Mhm.
so invisible, you don't even see me, and you're like
Mm.
one of the main clerical supervisors.
Yeah.
But instead, I went in and I just started building a relationship with her.
Yeah.
And I didn't start by going in and saying, "Hey, I'm a therapist here, so make sure you send people back to
You better
me."
send them back to me.
You should send them back to
Yes.
me. I did not should on her. Instead, I just started working on a relationship with her.
Mm.
Started stopping by her desk a little bit more often,
Mhm.
you know, commented on her hair, gave her a compliment, asked her if I could get her a refill on coffee because I knew she
Ooh.
liked coffee. And, over time, there was some trust and rapport that was established.
Mhm.
And then, she dared ask the question, "Well, what do you do here?" And I said, "I'm the therapist. I work for birth to 13,
Yeah.
and I can see any of those people in that age range." And she said, "Oh gosh, I didn't even know that." So, right, like the
Wow.
power of relationship, the power of connection, and what do we always say? Connection is protection.
Connection is protection. I feel like you just gave us the whole answer to this entire podcast episode
Relationships.
is like, how do you solve moral injury? Relationships.
Relationships. And and how do we create great relationships?
How do we create great relationships?
Safety and trust
Mhm.
and repair after any ruptures and a willingness to recalibrate when we move forward.
Yeah.